A few months ago, I took on extra night shifts at the local hospital. I was 32 then, and I thought keeping busy would help after losing my father. The hospital was old, with brick walls and flickering lights. The long, empty corridors were cold and lonely at night. I felt uneasy every time I walked through them. My shift began calmly enough. I walked to the nurse's station and took a deep breath before opening the chart for my first patient. Everything seemed normal, with machines buzzing and the smell of antiseptic in the air. I tried to settle into my work, but I was on edge. It was my first night back, and I was exhausted. Around midnight, I heard soft footsteps behind me. They were quick and urgent. I turned around, but found the hall empty. I told myself it was nothing, just my imagination, or maybe a trick of fatigue. I shook it off and got back to my paperwork. The next night, the footsteps returned. This time, I felt a presence behind me, but when I looked back, no one was there. My heart raced a little more each time. I need more coffee, I thought, but deep down, I felt something was off. By the third night, I began to hear whispers. They started quietly, almost like the wind, but then I could make out words. "Help me." I was disturbed, but kept my head down and pretended not to hear them. I didn't want to admit I was scared. Each shift after that, the footsteps followed me, accompanied by those whispers. They haunted me. I took a closer look at the charts and noticed something strange. A patient had died unexpectedly just before I started. I felt chills when I realized that the details on the chart seemed to shift every night. Dates and symptoms didn't match what I remembered. It felt unreal. I asked my coworkers about it. Each time, they changed the subject. I felt uneasy. One nurse said, "What happens here sometimes just stays here." I couldn't shake the discomfort. I wondered why they wouldn't talk about it. I tried to chalk it up to stress, but then I started seeing shadows darting around corners. My heart raced. I was tired, sure, but was it more than that? The hospital felt alive, but in a strange way I couldn't understand. Then came my worst moment. I stood at the end of a corridor when I saw a figure in the shadows. I took a step closer, my heart pounding. I asked softly, "Are you okay?" There was no response. I blinked, and the figure was gone. I took a step back, breathless and terrified. What was happening? Was someone trying to reach out? I don't have answers. I still hear those whispers in my mind. I still see that shadow. Every night shift feels like a puzzle piece that won't fit. What really happened in that hospital? I might never know. The next night, I braced myself for what was to come. I arrived at the hospital feeling more anxious than ever. The shadows seemed to grow longer in the dim lighting. I made my way to the nurse's station, and I tried to focus on my duties, but the whispers had intensified. "Help me." They echoed in my mind, and I felt as if they were coming from every direction. I needed answers. I decided to investigate the records of the recently deceased patient, the one whose details had shifted on the charts. I quietly slipped into the medical records room during a lull in my shift. The fluorescent lights buzzed above me, and a chill ran down my spine. I pulled the files out one by one, searching for anything unusual. While rifling through the papers, I found a folder marked with the initials of the patient. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside, the details were jumbled, and some papers were torn. I tried to piece together what had happened. That's when I saw it. An entry with a date that didn't make sense. It referenced an incident on a night I was working, but the patient's cause of death didn't match what the charts recorded. Why would they change it? I whispered to myself, fear coiling in my stomach. The rattle of a page next to me startled me. I turned sharply, but no one was there. A sense of dread washed over me, and I suddenly felt the weight of eyes watching me. I hurried back to the nurse's station, determined to talk to someone, anyone. I spotted Ella, an experienced nurse who was always calm during chaos. "Ella," I started, my voice shaky, can we talk about what happened to that patient who died last month? Something doesn't feel right." She paused, her expression shifting to one of caution. "You should let it go. There are things you don't understand. Trust me." I could tell she wanted to say more, but then glanced around and lowered her voice. This isn't a place for curiosity. I felt frustration bubbling within me. Why wouldn't anyone help? Just then, the lights flickered and a loud crash echoed down the corridor. My heart leapt into my throat as I rushed towards the sound. It came from the supply room. I took a deep breath and pushed open the door with trembling hands. The room was a mess, supplies were scattered everywhere, but it was empty. I stepped inside, scanning for any signs of what had happened. That's when I saw a small, crumpled piece of paper on the floor. It was half hidden beneath a fallen box. I picked it up, my heart racing as I unfolded it. Words were scrawled in shaky handwriting. I wasn't ready to die. Chills ran down my spine. Who wrote this? Had it been from that patient? I turned to leave, but as I did, the air grew colder. I felt a presence behind me. I whipped around, and just for a moment I saw the shadow again. It was standing there, a mere outline in the dim light. Before I could make sense of what I was seeing, the door slammed shut behind me, plunging me into darkness. Panic surged through me. "Let me out!" I shouted, pounding on the door. Then the whispers returned, louder and more desperate than ever. "Help me!" They filled the room, drowning out everything else. My breath hitched. I realized I was completely alone, trapped with a force I couldn't understand. What had I awakened? The darkness in the supply room swallowed me whole. I banged on the door, desperation rising within me. "Let me out!" I cried. But the only response was the echo of my own voice. The whispers grew louder, wrapping around me like a cold shroud. "Help me, please." It wasn't just my imagination anymore. Panic clawed at my throat. I fumbled for my phone, praying for a flicker of light. But then I remembered. Hospitals often had dead zones for cellular signals. I was trapped and isolated in this silence, surrounded by the ghosts of lost lives. Then, just as I thought it couldn't get any worse, I noticed a flicker of movement in the corner of my eye. I turned my head sharply, but there was nothing there. My heart raced. Was it the shadow again? I blinked, trying to dispel my fear. I focused on my breaths, trying to remain calm. I needed to think. I examined the door, searching for a way out, anything I could use to push or pull it open. That's when I noticed something odd by the floor near the hinges. A thin, dark line that looked like dried blood. The same unsettling feeling returned. What had happened here? Suddenly, the whispers changed. "You have to help her." The voice was clearer now, almost frantic. "You have to save me." In that moment, I felt the weight of urgency pressing down on me. Someone or something needed my help. I took another breath and shouted, Who do I need to save?" Silence fell again, heavy and suffocating. My heart thumped in my chest as I scanned the room. Then I remembered the paper. I pulled it from my pocket and felt its crumpled edges with trembling fingers. I wasn't ready to die. Questions swirled in my mind. Had the patient written that? But I couldn't think of their name. My pulse quickened. I may have known this patient. There was no way to tell. I pushed my back against the wall, willing myself to remain calm. "Please, just show me," I whispered. The air around me thickened, and then it happened. A sudden rush of cold wind swept through the room, and the lights flickered, illuminating the shadow again, stronger this time, clearer. I could make out a semblance of a figure. "Help me," it groaned, its voice strained and sorrowful. My breath hitched as recognition flooded over me. I couldn't place the face, but I knew. It was the same patient I had seen on the records. "It's you!" I gasped, realization dawning. How could I help someone who was already gone? With a sudden force, the door swung open, and the light from the hallway flooded in. I stumbled out, still in shock.
Before I could process what just happened, Ella found me there, staring into the empty room. "What happened?" she asked, concern etching her features. I... I saw her," I stammered, pointing back toward the supply room. "I think she needs help, but how?" My voice wavered, a mix of fear and resolve battling within me. Ella's expression turned to one of shadowed worry. "You shouldn't have seen her. It's not safe, and it's certainly not your place to interfere." Her words echoed the warnings I had received before. As uncertainty settled in, I felt the familiar chill creeping back into my bones. "But I can't just ignore it," I insisted. "She's trapped, just like I was." The tension in the air shifted, and for the first time I noticed the other nurses glancing over, their eyes filled with something I couldn't articulate. Fear? Understanding? Before I could question it further, Ella turned toward me, urgency etched in her face. "Meet me in the break room," she said quietly. "Tonight, we have to talk about why those whispers are getting louder and what you've really awakened." I swallowed hard. As unsettling truths loomed on the horizon, dread settled in the pit of my stomach. I had awakened something, and now, it seemed, it was my duty to face whatever came next. The break room was dimly lit when I arrived later that night. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and I found Ella sitting alone at the table, her face tense and shadowed. She looked up as I entered, her eyes a mix of apprehension and determination. I felt the weight of her gaze, as if she were trying to assess what had changed in me since the afternoon. "What did you see?" she asked, her voice quiet. I took a seat across from her, staring at my hands. My palms were sweaty, still trembling slightly from my earlier ordeal. "I saw her, the patient. She's trapped, Ella. She needs help," I confessed, my voice barely above a whisper. "But I don't know how to help a ghost." Ella sighed, rubbing her temples. "It's not just about helping her. There are rules," she said, her tone growing serious. "We don't interfere with what happens in those moments. You can't mess with the past, or you risk bringing something worse into the present." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Worse? What do you mean?" I asked, searching her face for answers. "Others have tried," she continued, her voice low but urgent. "Those whispers you heard, they've grown louder for a reason. Someone is drawing attention to this place, and we don't know what."
"Their intentions are." She paused, looking around the break room as if she expected someone to walk in at any moment. "Or what they want from us." My heart raced. I hadn't thought about the consequences of opening that door. What if I had unleashed something darker? "And what happens if we ignore it?" I ventured, trying to push through the rising fear. "If you ignore it," Ella said, her eyes narrowing, "the spirits linger. They keep searching for resolution. But if there's no help, they can become vengeful. They need closure. If it doesn't come, they might come for us." An unsettling silence hung between us. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, even in this room. "What can I do? How do I help her?" The despair in my voice surprised me. Ella looked at me thoughtfully, then sighed again. "You need to learn about her. The more you know about her story, the better chance you have of helping her." "Okay," I said, taking a deep breath, "but how?" "Look through the records. Find out her name, her history. The more you dig, the clearer the path will become." Her voice softened as she leaned in, a hint of concern in her eyes. "But be careful. You might uncover things that were meant to stay buried." Just then, the lights flickered overhead. I glanced up, unease creeping back. "Is this place really safe?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. Ella's expression shifted, and I knew she felt it too. "It's not the building I'm worried about," she said quietly. "It's what we're awakening within it." As I pondered her ominous words, a strange noise echoed from the hallway.
It sounded like a soft whispering, the kind that sends a shiver down your spine. The air grew colder, and I instinctively turned toward the door. "Ella," I began, but before I could finish, the door swung open. A flow of icy air rushed in, almost as if something was pushing its way through. I gasped, my mouth going dry as I squinted into the darkness beyond. Someone, no, something, was waiting just outside. My heart raced as I squinted, trying to make out the shape in the darkness. It loomed just outside the door, its form shifting in the dim light. I felt a cold wave wash over me, creeping up my spine and stealing the warmth from my body. "Ella, close the door," I urged in a harsh whisper, but it felt like my voice was barely audible over the rush of blood in my ears. Ella's eyes were wide, her breath shallow. She didn't move at first, frozen in place. I could see the struggle in her expressions, fear battling duty. Finally, she snapped out of it and lunged forward to shut the door, blocking whatever it was from coming in. The echo of the door slamming against the frame sent a shudder through me. "What was that?" I asked, my voice shaking. I don't know," replied, glancing nervously at the door as if something could come bursting through at any moment. "It didn't feel like a person. I couldn't think of a time I felt more afraid. What was waiting outside? What if it was more than a ghost? What if it was something I couldn't even begin to understand? "We need to get out of here," I said. "We need to look at the records." Ella nodded, but her face reflected deeper worry. "Fine, but we must be quick. If something's out there, we don't want to attract its attention." We hurried down the hallway, the white walls feeling like they were closing in around us. My footsteps echoed too loudly in the empty building, and with every sound I felt that sense of something watching me, lurking just out of sight. We reached the records room, and I pushed the door open, revealing rows of metal cabinets filled with dusty files and thick binders. The musty smell hit me like a wall. I was suddenly overwhelmed by the weight of all the stories, the lives hidden in those papers. "What do you need to know?" Ella asked, her voice barely a whisper as she stepped inside. "Anything about the patient I saw." I rifled through a drawer, my fingers trembling. Her name, what happened to her, anything. As I flipped through file after file, I stumbled upon one that seemed significant. The page bore a name that sent a shiver down my back. Emily Wright. According to the notes, she had been a patient here years ago, under mysterious circumstances. I was about to read more when a sudden crash echoed from outside the room, making both of us jump. Unconsciously, we pressed against the far wall. "What was that?" Ella asked, her eyes wide. "It sounded like it came from the break room," I answered. My heart thudded louder with every passing moment. "We need to find out what caused that." "Or we could just leave," she suggested, a hint of panic creeping into her voice. "Ella, we can't." I took a steadying breath. "If we abandon this now, it could get worse. We have to figure out who Emily is." As we crept cautiously toward the door, I couldn't shake the dread building inside me. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, plunging us into darkness for a split second. When they returned, I noticed something different. A shadow shifted across the wall behind us, moving swiftly and silently, too swiftly for me to believe it was merely my imagination. I turned to Ella, my eyes wide with fear. "Did you see that?" I whispered. Just then, the overhead lights cut out completely. Everything went dark. The darkness enveloped us like a thick blanket, swallowing every sound, except for the rapid beating of my heart. I blinked, trying to adjust, but my eyes betrayed me. There was nothing to see. "Ella?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "Are you still there?" "Yeah," she replied softly, her voice. "What do we do?" I had no answers. Panic threatened to set in, tightening around my chest. "Let's find the door." I reached out, my hands brushing against the cold metal of the filing cabinets. Guided by touch, I inched my way forward, praying that something or someone was lurking in the shadows. The only sound was the soft scrape of my shoes against the floor. Then, from the darkness, I heard it, a faint rustle, like something sliding against the wall. My breath caught in my throat. "Ella, did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Yes," she replied, her voice rising in panic. "What is it?" "I don't know," I admitted, my voice shaking. I took a step backward, trying to retreat, but something cold brushed against my arm. I flinched. "Get back!" I shouted, stumbling away. My fear fueled a reckless energy. I grabbed Ella's hand and we dashed toward the door, hearts pounding. As we burst into the hallway, light flickered nervously overhead. I looked back at the records room, just as I saw a figure dart across the doorway. My stomach dropped. "What was that?" Ella asked, fear plastered on her face. "Whatever it is, it's inside," I urged, pulling her along. "We have to find a way out, now." Racing down the corridor, I felt the walls closing in as dread crawled under my skin. First the sound, then the shadow, and now this presence. I could feel it, like static electricity prickling at my back. The break room was still down the hall. If there was any answer, it might be there. We rounded a corner, and to our dismay, we found the break room door ajar, swinging slightly, as if someone had just exited. With a quick exchange of glances, we knew we had to investigate. "On three," I whispered, squeezing her hand. "1, 2, 3. We pushed the door open wider, the hinges protesting with a creak. Inside, it was dark, save for the faint glow of the signal lights in the ceiling. But what struck me was the large table in the center, cluttered with scattered papers and an overturned chair. "Look," Ella pointed, "something's on the table." My eyes followed her gaze, and I felt my heart rate increase again. It was a file, the same file I had found earlier on Emily Wright. The words "adverse reactions" were scrawled across the front, and it was open, a page torn halfway out. I stepped closer, adrenaline coursing through me. This couldn't just be a coincidence. But then, from the corner of my eye, I caught movement again. A figure stepping out of the shadows, its face hidden. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. But before I could process what was happening, a loud crash echoed through the break room, sending us both reeling back. "Run!" Ella screamed. As we fled out of the break room, I could feel the weight of something following us. We raced down the
hall where everything went silent, save for our rapid breaths. I needed to know what was happening, who Emily was, and why everything felt so wrong. Then, everything went cold. That's when I realized we were not alone. We stumbled into the next corridor, the fluorescent lights flickering overhead like a strobe. My breath was rapid and shallow, and I could feel Ella's hand tremble in mine. We paused for a moment, leaning against the wall. I briefly considered the doors leading to the emergency wing and the supply room, both of which seemed like possible refuge. But which way was safer? "Did you see the figure?" Ella asked, her voice choked with fear. "Yeah," I replied, trying to keep my own terror in check. But I couldn't make out anything about it, just a dark shape. Before I could say more, I heard a low hum, like a generator sputtering to life. "What is that?" Ella asked, looking around. "Maybe it's the backup generators," I suggested, but even I wasn't convinced. The sound reverberated through the corridor, growing louder with each passing second. There was a familiar sense of dread creeping in, pushing my heart to race faster. "We should keep moving," I said, gripping her hand tighter. "There's something off about this place." We pressed on, our footsteps echoing against the hard floor.
Then, as we turned a corner, we faced a strange sight. A heavy metal door, slightly ajar, with flickering red light spilling out from the gap. "Should we check it out?" Ella whispered, glancing at me. I hesitated, my instincts screaming to flee, but curiosity gnawed at me. "We might find something useful," I said finally. Pushing the door open, the hinges squeaked like a rusted hinge, revealing a small room filled with medical supplies. But the sight that chilled me wasn't the stacks of bandages and syringes. It was the wall, a giant corkboard plastered with snapshots. Photos of nurses, patients, and doctors, only there was something disturbingly wrong. Each photo was marked with black ink, X's over the faces of those who sat smiling in happier times. Names were scribbled, some crossed out completely, with a date prominently written beneath each one. "Ella, look at this," I breathed, stepping closer. My pulse raced at the growing realization that these were not just random images. They represented lives, lives that might have been lost or altered. "Who did this?" she asked, her voice shaky. "What does it mean?" I don't know," I admitted, swallowing hard. "But we need to get out of here before I could finish my thought, the hum transitioned into a loud crackle, and the lights overhead dimmed, plunging the room partially back into darkness. "Something's happening," Ella said, panic swelling in her chest. Just then, the heavy door slammed shut on its own. The sound echoed like a gunshot, making us both jump. I yanked at the doorknob. It wouldn't budge. "Great, just great," I muttered. "Now what?" I turned back to Ella.
And that's when I noticed a shadow moving near the corner of the room, slipping behind a stack of boxes. My heart lurched as I stepped closer, peering into the darkness. "Is someone there?" I called out, my voice wavering. No response came, only the sound of my heartbeat thrumming in my ears. A chilling realization settled in. We were trapped, and whatever lurked in the shadows was not going to let us go easily. I felt Ella's breath hitch next to me. "Let's find another way," she whispered, her grip tightening around my arm. As we scanned the room frantically for an exit, I caught a glimmer out of the corner of my eye. A doorway. It was small and hidden behind one of the shelves. "That might be our way out," I said, moving toward it. But just before I could reach it, I heard a voice, a low whisper that crawled across my skin like ice. "Stay with us." And then one of the boxes began to topple over, spilling its contents onto the floor. We were definitely not alone. My heart was pounding. The whispers seemed to echo, swirling around us in the dim light. My instincts screamed at me to get out, but the small door still beckoned like a lifeline. "Ella, we need to go," I urged her, but it felt like the shadow looming nearby had drawn a line in the sand. I took a deep breath and lunged towards that hidden doorway, my fingers brushing against the cool metal of the handle. The box continued to tumble, and as it hit the ground, I heard the unmistakable sound of glass shattering. The noise sent a jolt through me, and I turned back to Ella in a panic. "We can't stay," I said, feeling the walls closing in. "Now!" Ella was right behind me as I yanked the door. It creaked open, revealing a narrow passage filled with dust and cobwebs. A strong odor hit me, a mix of mildew and something metallic. "Is it safe?" Ella asked, her eyes wide and filled with fear. "I don't know, but it's better than being in here." I stepped inside, pulling her with me. The door behind us didn't slam shut, but the heavy metal thud settled like a weight on my chest. Inside the passage, the air was still, and the flickering lights overhead barely illuminated our surroundings. "Do you hear that?" Ella whispered. I held my breath. At first, I thought it was just my heart pounding in my ears, but then I heard it too. A low, vibrating sound, like distant voices whispering in a language I didn't understand. It was eerie, twisting my stomach into knots. "Let's keep moving," I said, picking up the pace.
The corridor was claustrophobic, its walls lined with old peeling paint. I could almost feel the history of this place
seeping through the cracks. Just when I thought we'd escaped whatever lurked behind us, I glanced back and a chill ran down my spine. There it was, a dark shape following us, but it was too blurred to identify. I blinked, hoping it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. "Faster," I urged, pushing Ella ahead of me. She didn't hesitate, fear propelling her forward. Up ahead, I spotted another door, a regular wooden one, tucked neatly against the wall. A flicker of hope ignited in me. "There! We might be able to get out!" I reached for the handle, but just as I did, I heard the whisper again, clearer this time. "Stay with us." My stomach dropped. The tone was almost persuasive, and I felt an inexplicable pull to listen, to surrender to whatever was behind that heavy door. "Don't!" I shouted, yanking Ella back as I wrestled with the doorknob. It resisted, and I felt sick at the thought that it could be another trap. Then the shadows flared behind us, coalescing into something more solid, something that radiated a cold darkness. Just as I threw my shoulder against the door, I was knocked back by a force I couldn't see, slamming me to the ground. "Run!" I yelled to Ella, but as I looked back, I realized she wasn't following. She stood frozen, entranced by whatever was looming in the passage. "Please, Ella," I pleaded desperately, pushing myself up to my knees. "We have to go." In that moment, I recognized the dread that washed over me. The thing in the shadows was more than just a figment. It had intent, and it wanted us. The air grew thick with an impending doom. That's when I saw it, a flash of something bright behind Ella, illuminating the darkness with a sickly glow. Fear tightened my throat. We had to escape this place, but escape from what? We were about to find out. The moment the bright flash flickered out, everything plunged into darkness, and all I could hear was the low thrum of that haunting whisper. "Stay with us." It was louder now, swirling around us like a physical entity. A shiver raced down my spine as I pushed myself to stand. "Ella!" I shouted again, desperation spilling into my voice. She didn't move. Her eyes were glazed over, a disconnected stare aimed at the encroaching shadows. I couldn't let her be consumed by whatever was happening to her. I took a hesitant step forward, my heart pounding against my ribs like a warning bell. "Ella, fight it! We need to get out of here!" The air thickened and the temperature dropped. I could see my breath, a thin mist that hung like a ghost in the air. As I took another step, a chill swept through my body. The dark shape, once just a sliver of shadow, was now vividly taking form around Ella, closing in on her as if it were seeking to envelop her completely. Surge of energy pulsed through me, igniting my fear into action. I reached out, grabbing her wrist. "Come on!" I shook her as gently as I could, but my grip was firm. "Snap out of it!" That seemed to break the trance. Her eyes widened with panic, and she blinked rapidly. I could almost see the realization flood back in, bringing life to her features. "What happened?" she stammered, looking around frantically. "No time!" I pulled her toward the door I had tried to open earlier. It felt like the walls were pushing back, trying to keep us in that dreadful passage. "Wait! The glass!" Ella gasped. The remnants of the box we'd dropped came back to me, sharp shards scattered on the floor like tiny stars. I wasn't sure why it mattered, but the thought made me hesitate. "They'll want it," I murmured, hardly aware of the words until they slipped from my lips. Whatever that thing... I felt it before I saw it, a rush of cold air that brushed past us, heralding the return of the darkness. The shape shifted, lunging toward us, and at that moment my instincts roared louder than before. "Now!" I yanked Ella toward the door, and with a collective push, we threw our weight against it. The knob turned with a reluctant creak, and the door swung open, a rush of stale air greeting us, heavy with dust and so much uncertainty.
Beyond the threshold lay an old storage room, cluttered with forgotten medical supplies and sheets draped over furniture. It felt like a graveyard of the past, frozen in time and space. I barely had time to take it in before another gust of cold air filled the room, and I felt it, that presence, moving closer. "No!" I shouted, shoving Ella into the room and stepping inside after her. The door slammed shut behind us, the sound hollow and final. As I turned to face the darkness, cringing against the impending doom that seemed to seep through the cracks, the distant glowing object caught my eye again. It was pulsating softly from beneath a pile of dusty linens. "Ella, over here," I said, pointing. My heart raced as I approached it, wary of what it might be. Whatever was happening felt tied to it, something otherworldly anchoring the shadows. As I reached for it, my fingers brushed against something smooth and cool. The moment I lifted it, a high-pitched wail echoed through the room, a sound that seemed to emanate from all around us. That noise wasn't the only thing that changed. The shadows shifted again, becoming charged with a furious energy. I dropped the object, my instinct screaming. It rolled away, revealing itself, a small, unassuming glass vial, crackling with a pulse of energy. What did I just unleash? I wondered aloud, panic clawing at me. The structure began to tremble around us. "Ella, I think we need to leave, now!" The walls were closing in, and I was acutely aware
that whatever was in the corridor wasn't just a figment of my imagination. We had awakened something. But before we could devise a plan to escape, the lights flickered and then went dead, cascading us into darkness once more. Panic washed over me as the darkness settled in, its oppressive weight stealing away any sense of safety. I could hear Ella's breath quicken beside me, and I clutched her hand tighter. We had to escape whatever haunted this hospital, whatever we had brought upon ourselves. Moving cautiously, I whispered to her, "We need to find a way out." I turned to peer into the obscurity, trying to judge our surroundings. "Maybe there's another exit in here." Ella nodded, though I could feel her trembling. "Right, let's just—" Her words were cut short as a low vibration rippled through the air, a sinister undertone that resonated in my bones. "Do you feel that?" I asked, my heart racing. "It's like it's alive." Just then, I heard the sound of whispers again, swirling toward us. The low voices harmonized, repeating a single phrase. "Stay with us." Fear tightened around my throat as the shadows shifted, coalescing into something darker, something more tangible. "Run!" I shouted, grasping Ella's wrist and pulling her deeper into the storage room. There had to be another door, another chance at freedom. We navigated the clutter, stumbling over forgotten equipment and abandoned beds, the cries of the ghostly whispers urging us to linger. Still, the urgency drove us forward. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted a faint beam of light spilling through the cracks of a door on the far side of the room. "There!" I shouted, pulling Ella towards it. "We can't give up." As I reached for the handle, a shriek erupted behind us, filling the room with cold dread. Whatever was in the darkness was on our heels. We flung the door open, the hinges screeching as we stepped out into a dimly lit corridor. The sound of our panicked footsteps echoed around us, mingling with the haunting whispers that seemed to follow. "Where do we go?" Ella gasped, glancing back as the darkness pressed closer, eager to reclaim its lost prey. "Follow me!" I yelled, charging down the hallway, desperate for an escape. The oppressive air felt thick with energy, like the moments before a storm. Every instinct screamed at me to run faster as we bolted past rooms and medical equipment, the flickering lights casting eerie shadows along the walls. We turned another corner, and my heart sank. A single exit sign glowed faintly at the end of the corridor, but the path to it was blocked by a dark figure. It stood, watching us with a presence so cold that I could barely catch my breath. "Ella, we can't let it stop us," I gasped, pulling her closer to me. Together we barreled forward, while the shape loomed in the dimness, its features indistinguishable, but its intent was unmistakable. Just as I caught a glimpse of Emily's face, serene and released, before she vanished into the light. We stood there, trembling, the echoes of fear replaced by an overwhelming sense of relief. "What just happened?" Ella whispered, her breath shaky. I think we helped her," I stammered, the reality of it all sinking in. Yet the unsettling mystery of the hospital still loomed large. As we made our way toward the exit, I couldn't help but wonder about the stories still hidden within this place, the spirits still trapped. I glanced back at the corridor, whispering a silent prayer for all the souls that might still be waiting for their chance, like Emily. Would I ever understand the full scope of what happened? Was the danger truly over? Would the whispers return? For now, it didn't matter. We stepped into the cool night air, free from the confines of the past, but knowing a mystery lingered just beyond our reach. I moved to a different city after that. Sometimes I think about Emily and the countless others lost in the shadows. I often wonder if they're finally at peace, or if they still wander, seeking solace and closure. But mostly, I try not to think about it.